So, welcome to the Missouri State Capitol. Now, my name's Lucas. I'm an interpreter with the Missouri State Museum, and today we're going to be talking about the lunette painting just behind me here. Now, if you've ever been on a tour of the Missouri State Capitol, I'm sure you probably recognize where we're at. Now, this is a lunette painting called The Assembling of the First Legislature in St. Charles, Missouri, 1821 by Rick Miller. And if you stick with us, we're going to jump on in and take a closer look at it.
Alright, so as you can see from the title, this is a painting of the assembling of the First Legislature in St. Charles, Missouri in 1821. Now, before Missouri became a state, one of the first things that the legislators had to do was to write our Constitution and decide where they would put our permanent capital. Now, they did that in these upstairs rooms with the green shutters on this building, but can you guess what was on the first floor of the building? Well, let me tell you, some of our most popular guesses are tavern or hotel, but neither of those are actually correct. In fact, the first floor of this building was a general merchant store. Now, by general merchant, that means they sold a little bit of everything. Now, like I said, while they're up here, they had to decide where they're going to put our permanent capital. And at first, they considered putting the permanent capital in St. Louis or St. Charles, because those were the two biggest cities of the day. However, they ultimately decided that they did not want to put all of the political power in the state out on the east side of the state. Instead, they wanted it to be centrally located, and in order to ensure that it would be centrally located, they used the rivers as landmarks. Therefore, they wrote into our Constitution that the capital had to be located along the Missouri River and within about 40 miles of the mouth of the Osage River. Jefferson City is about 12 miles from the Osage River, so we are definitely well within the set limitations. But this wasn't the only site in consideration. In fact, some of the early top contenders for state capital included Sedalia and Boonville. Ultimately, though, they decided to build a brand new city to be the state capital. So Jefferson City didn't even exist until they decided they were going to build the capital here. Now, one of the reasons they like this location is that, well, we've got these nice big bluffs that overlook the Missouri River. And back then, the Missouri River acted kind of like a major highway back. So by building the capital on top of one of those big bluffs, it'd be one of the first things people saw when they came up the river. And even today, the Capitol is still one of the first things you can see when you drive into Jefferson City. Now, do you know how many Capitol buildings we've had here in Jefferson City? Well, we've actually had 3 Capitol buildings, with our current Capitol being the third. Now, the first Capitol building, with a drawing here of what they think the first Capitol looked like, was actually built back around 1826, and it stood right about where the governor's mansion currently stands. And that one stood until about 1837. But they think that what happened is, one night the Secretary of State went to bed and he left a fire going in his fireplace. Well, overnight, an ember rolled out of that fireplace and it started a fire that burnt that building to the ground. Well, by that point, they were already thinking about building a bigger Capitol building because the legislature had expanded fairly significantly. So they decided to build the second Capitol building where we're currently standing, as it was a slightly bigger bluff top. Now, as you can see, they had 2 versions of that second Capitol building. The first Capitol building on the left here was a little bit smaller. They did eventually expand that out to a much bigger building with a bigger, fancier dome. And it stood until about 1911, but in February of 1911, there was this freak lightning storm, and lightning actually struck the top of that fancy dome. And unfortunately, it started a fire that burnt that building to the ground. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, by this point in time, the people in Missouri were getting kinda tired of their capitals burning down. So they decided they were going to build this third building entirely out of stone so it wouldn't burn. Now, they call this stone Carthage marble, but it's actually a really high-grade limestone. And because it's limestone, if you look closely, you can actually see fossils in the floors and walls all around the building. For example, in the bottom right here, you can see a fossilized shark's tooth that you'll find on the floor in the Capitol building. Now, they started construction of the building in 1913, and they were handed the keys over to the legislature in 1917, so it took them about 4 years before they were completed with the building. And in order to construct this building, they told the legislature that it would cost about $3.5 million. Now, of course, the legislature back then didn't have that kind of money just sitting around, so in order to raise funds for the Capitol, they decided they were going to do a bond issue. But they were a little too good at selling those bonds. Instead of raising $3.5 million, they accidentally raised $4.5 million. While they were glad to have the extra million in case they went off budget, amazingly enough, they stayed exactly on budget. So there was $1 million left over when they were finished. The Attorney General at the time ruled that the funds could not be placed in general revenue, claiming that as the funds had been raised for the Capitol, they must be spent on the Capitol. Therefore, it was determined that the excess money would be used to hire artists to decorate the building. Artists from around the world were selected to paint murals, including the big murals in the center of the dome, 41 lunettes, 16 of which have optical illusions in them, and sculptors were hired to build the various statues, fountains, and memorials around the outside of the building. As a result of the extensive artwork, in addition to the impressive architecture, Missouri's Capitol definitely ranks among one of the most beautiful capitals in the nation. Now, if you get a chance, I would definitely recommend stopping by to check it out in person.
All right, everyone, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that maybe that will encourage you to take a look at some of our other videos. We've got several other virtual tours that are going to be posted on our website. And I also hope that maybe it'll encourage you to come in and take a look at our building and also enjoy our museum. Thanks very much, everyone.